Intel has just released its 9th generation of iCore processor, and with it comes a new generation of motherboard. It's always an exciting moment for me to review new generation motherboard because it is an opportunity for manufacturer to showcase what they've learned and what they developed in the past development cycle, which is quite short, I have to admit, only 9 months. From the Z270 to Z370 and Z370 to Z390. Anyways, I'm digressing. Anywho, today we are reviewing Asus latest Prime Z390-A, its flagship bestseller motherboard. So yes, lots of expectations and lots of scrutiny on that very new platform. Is it worth it? Will it bring us a bunch of new features which will make it worth the extra expenditure 9 short months after the Z370 release? Well, wonder no more, young damsel in distress. The Frenchman that you have here will answer those questions for you right after this. Yeah. So before going to the motherboard, I am going to cover the chipset. And the Z390 chipset is in all points identical to the Z370 chipset, its predecessors. The only differences are the number of available USB 3.1 second generation, the 10 gigabit ones, and for the first time we do have a Wi-Fi standard adapter which is integrated within the chipset, so manufacturer won't have to add an external silicon chip for the Wi-Fi adapter, and that's actually pretty cool. But it is also the problem we've met in the past 3 generations of chipset. Nothing has really changed since the Z270, and the Z390 chipset is a refresh of the Z370 chipset. But that is also good news for us because both chipsets will support the same processor. The Z370 is frontward compatible and the Z390 is backward compatible. So yes, 8700K, no problem, you can throw it on the Z390. And your i9 9900K, if anybody can find those, you can throw it on your Z370. I do have to say that early benchmarks show that the Z370 has performance issue with the latest 9th generation of Intel processor, and you might find yourself with a loss of 10 to 20% performances on those processors alone. But let's see, because they're gonna be certainly some BIOS update and those performance differentials might just disappear. So let's jump right in the motherboard. So the Prime series is Asus entry level for any given chipset, and usually what that means is that Asus is trying to do a balance play or juggle between affordability and feature-rich products, meaning that this is the biggest bang for your buck. This is where you're gonna find the richest motherboard for the lowest possible price, and that is why usually I'm very excited to review those kind of motherboards. But enough talking, and let's do some unboxing. First, we have a two-way SLI bridge, a fan bracket for extra airflow on our M.2 solid-state drive, a couple of SATA cables, our front connector bridge, a padded I/O shield, our M.2 solid-state drive screw and screw raisers, and finally the usual user manual, coupon and DVD drivers. So let's take a closer look to our motherboard. Form factor wise, we have a ATX motherboard, meaning 30.5 cm long for 24.4 cm wide. No protective backplate on the back of our PCB. Powering it, we have a LGA1151 CPU socket, which will be compatible with the 8th and 9th generation iCore Intel CPUs. Memory wise, we have the usual dual channel, which can support up to 64 GB of DDR4 RAM, overclockable up to 4266 MHz, and that is 266 MHz more than available on its predecessors, the Prime Z370-A. So that is actually a 5% bump in the clock. That's pretty cool. Staying in the memory, we have a dual M.2 solid-state drive configuration on our board. One which can support up to 11 cm long M.2 solid-state drive modules and one up to 8 cm. Okay, so now I want to point out at something which might seem insignificant or detail, but which has a lot of importance to me. The M.2 solid-state drive heat shield is separated from the chipset heatsink, and that is a big deal because in the previous generation they were merged together, and that did bring an issue in thermotransfer because the M.2 solid-state drive tend to overheat much faster than any other component in your build. Therefore, the chipset will overheat as well, and it would impact the overall performance of your build. So yes, it looks like a small thing, but it's actually a big deal, and kudos to Asus for that. As in its two predecessors, the Z390 chipset is Opten ready, meaning that our M.2 solid-state drive can swap data up to 32 gigabit per second. And as I mentioned previously, it does also mean that they will thermothrottle very quickly and produce a lot of heat, and that is why we have a thermopad ready for use on the other side of our M.2 solid-state drive heat shield. Moving upwards towards the PCIe expresses, we have 6 slots, 3 single slots single speed and 3 16 slots which different speed. Note that only the 16 slots closest to the CPU can deliver up to 16 full bus speed, and it's been colored in gray to show that difference. So if you have only one video card, this is where you want it to be for optimal performances. If you are going for a 2 GPU configuration, both of our 16 slots will be sharing the same bus bandwidth, and therefore we'll have a 8x8 bus speed configuration. And if you are going to use the 3 16 slots PCIe Express lanes, we will have a 8x4 and 4 bus bandwidth configuration. Note that the two first 16 slot PCIe Expresses have been metallically reinforced, since they are the ones most likely to carry the heavy weight of video cards in the build. Staying in peripherals, we have 3 USB second generation plug, and I'm gonna stop you right there. That seems to be a small detail once more, but there's a reason why we have more second generation USB. It's not only for your front panel, but more and more accessories in your build are using these plugs to power and transfer data. For example, if you have a clever or intelligent power supply unit such as a HX1000i from Corsair, which can read the wattage output and input of your power supply unit, then you'll have to plug it in there so that the software can recognize it. Secondly, if you are going to use an all-in-one water cooling setup for your processor, then it will take its 5V from a USB second generation, and of course you still need one for your front panel peripherals. We also have a USB 3.1 first generation front panel connector, which can transfer data up to 5 gigabit per second, and finally a USB 3.1 first generation Type-C front panel connector. SATA-wise, our motherboard is equipped with 6 third generation SATA plugs, which can all transfer up to 6 gigabit per second individually. I/O-wise, we have, starting from the left, a PS2 keyboard mouse plug, 2 second generation USB plug, 4 USB 3.1 second generation, including 1 Type-C, and that is where the Z390 is different from the Z370, because we have more 3.1 second generation. They can all transfer data up to 10 gigabit per second, and that is also a small improvement, but for people like me who are swapping data day in and day out, this is a well-needed improvement. 2 3.1 first generation USB plugs, which can all transfer data up to 5 gigabit each individually, a display and HDMI plug for our integrated graphics, our usual Intel 1 gigabit LAN, and finally the usual 5+1 optical audio channels. Alright, so we've seen the general aspect of the Prime Z390-A, and already we can tell there's a few nice evolution compared to its predecessor, but here comes my favorite part of the review, the enthusiastic part of it. And if you follow my channel, you know that I'm kind of a custom water cooling geek, and for me a good or well-rounded motherboard needs to be able to do it all, even on a budget, and it needs to accommodate a custom water cooling as well as airflow or all-in-one cooling system. And in this case, the Prime Z390-A did not disappoint me. We have no less than 7 fan connectors, 2 of which are compatible with pump PWM, and let's note that we can connect an external thermal sensor right here if needed. And if 5, 6 or 7 fans is not enough for your build, who are you, a submariner? You can install an extension card right here and add up to 8 additional fans. Confession time, I did say earlier in the review that the enthusiastic part of the motherboard would be my favorite part of the review, but it is not the case. The aesthetical part is actually my favorite part, and that's because this board, as all the other previous Prime motherboard, are Aura compliant. And in a nutshell, if you do not know what Aura compliancy is, first I want you to take a closer look at yourself and your life and where you at right now as a young man or woman. For you not to know what Aura compliancy is, you got job. In a nutshell, the Aura effect will sync all your different components RGB to glow and dance in a synchronous, beautiful and glamorous way. And this board is fitted with 2 RGB strips, one right behind the I/O roof and one right behind our chipset heat shield. And if that is not enough, you have an additional 2 RGB Aura compliant connectors on your motherboard, one here and one there. But I regret the fact that there is no RGB addressable connector. Alright, so conclusion time. The Prime Z390-A will cost you anywhere between $190 to $200 before taxes. And, you know, for this kind of motherboard, well-featured, robust, solid motherboard, it's always a good idea to have it under $200. And specifically, given the evolutions and improvement that we've noticed from its predecessors, the Prime Z370-A, and I'm gonna mention very quickly the fact that we have more 3.1 second generation USBs on the board, both for back I/O and front panel. The fact that we have more USB 2.0 front panel connector, again a small thing but really needed, because again accessories and components will need those to be powered and transfer information so that you can read it out on your computer. The fact that there is a separation between the M.2 solid state drive heat shield and the chipset heatsink. And finally, the fact that the RAM clock is bumping up from 4 GHz to 4.266, 5% more, about a bit more than 5%, actually it's more like 6% more clock for RAM. So all those are really good stuff. On the lower point, on what I'm going to regret, is the fact that we do not have the RGB addressable connector on this motherboard. I really wanted to see it. The fact that I'm not a fan of how it looks, really. The I/O, specifically the I/O housing, I think it's just too tall. It's way too tall for what it is. And if you take a closer look to it, I mean, I saw it, but there is this big gapping space right there, which is needless. I don't know why they did this. I'm not a fan of that particular thing, but these points are not deal breakers. Of course, the pros completely outweigh the cons. But the real issue here, and the real elephant in the room, like we say in France, is it worth upgrading from your Prime Z370 to your Prime Z390? And the answer is no. If you had purchased a Prime Z370 last year, your motherboard has 95% or 90% of the feature present on this motherboard, for one. And secondly, your Prime Z370 is compatible to the latest 9th generation of iCore processor. So for my money, if I have a Prime Z370 or any Z370 motherboard in my build, I'm not gonna upgrade. I'm gonna keep with it, I'm gonna stay with it. I don't need to spend more money or 200 bucks. If you have an older build, a Z270 or Z170, yes, it's definitely worth it. You have great value, really great features, and even some engineering changes that Asus had foresight to apply on this particular board. So in this case, go for it, don't think twice. If you're still here, it probably means because you like my channel or you fell asleep in front of my review. If it is the case, wake up. But what I would really appreciate it if you did subscribe to my channel, like, share, and all that stuff, because I'm a pretty small channel and I need to grow it. So yeah, anything you can throw at me, I'll take it.